My dad said I shouldn't attend his retirement party because I would embarrass the family. They all agreed like I never existed. I kept quiet. But when the celebration crashed in front of everyone, they suddenly needed me. Few hours later, 72 missed calls. It happened on a warm Thursday evening in early June. The sun hadn't even fully set yet, and I was in my apartment folding laundry on my couch when my dad called. At first, his voice sounded normal, calm, polite, almost rehearsed. He talked about the weather, work, the cake they ordered, how Mom was stressing over decorations. And for a moment, I felt good. Included. Like maybe he remembered I existed. But then his tone shifted slightly, just barely, and I felt my stomach tighten. I knew something was coming. I knew because every family talk that began softly always ended in some decision that left me on the outside. So I braced myself, even before he said it. Even before the words actually landed. "Rose," he said, "I want to talk to you about Saturday. The retirement celebration." I paused, clutching the towel I'd been folding, because I knew this wasn't just information. This was a setup. He took a breath, the kind he does when he's about to pretend something is logical. "I think it's better if you don't come." I didn't understand at first. I really didn't. "What? Why?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. I hate that my voice always gets smaller around him. He never even hesitated. "Your presence might complicate things. You know how the rest of the family is. I don't want anyone uncomfortable. And you've always had a way of drawing attention to yourself." The blow landed so hard my chest burned. I stood there in silence, still holding the same towel, staring at the same crease in the fabric as if reality would shift if I stared long enough. But he wasn't done. "It's an important event for me," he added. "I want everything to go smoothly. People will be taking pictures. I just don't want any issues." That was his way of saying I didn't belong in their perfect family image. Not attractive enough. Not successful enough. Not married with kids like my siblings. Not photogenic. Not whatever version of a daughter he wished he had. I said nothing, and the silence stretched between us until he sighed and said, "I hope you understand," like he was the one being forced into a difficult decision. When he hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat on the couch in complete stillness, replaying his words like someone pressing replay on a wound. "I kept thinking," he said it so casually, like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. The next day, my phone buzzed non-stop, not with apologies or second thoughts, but with texts from my siblings in the family group chat. They weren't confused. They weren't shocked. They weren't even sympathetic. They were agreeing. One after another. "It's for the best, Rose. Dad deserves peace on his big day. Let's not make this about you." One message from my older sister, Claire, cut deeper than the rest. "You know people always ask about you. It becomes awkward. We just want a normal event this time." A normal event. As if my existence was abnormal. As if me showing up would destroy the atmosphere. And not one person in that chat, not a single cousin, aunt, or sibling said, "This is wrong." They all agreed, like excluding me was completely rational. That evening, I stared at the ceiling in my dimly lit bedroom for hours, my thoughts spiraling in circles that made no sense and perfect sense at the same time. I kept wondering what I had done so horribly wrong. Was it my career? My weight? My clothing? My quietness? My apartment not being fancy enough? Maybe it was because I was the only one who didn't follow the path they wanted. College, marriage, kids, a picture-perfect life. I chose art. I chose independence. I chose a different kind of peace. And maybe that bothered them more than I ever realized. Maybe they saw my life as some kind of failure they didn't want displayed in pictures. The thing that twisted the knife deeper was how normal it seemed to them. How no one questioned Dad's decision. How no one even privately messaged me to ask if I was okay. I kept waiting. But that message never came. Saturday arrived faster than I wanted. The day of the party. I woke up early out of habit, even though I had nowhere to be. The sun was bright, the air warm, birds chirping outside my window, as if the world was determined to be cheerful while I felt like sinking into the floor. I avoided social media because I knew the pictures would come. The matching outfits. The staged smiles. The speeches. The family portraits, without me. I made coffee, but the taste was flat. I turned on the TV but didn't hear anything. I walked to the window and watched other people starting their day while my phone stayed painfully silent. Not a single check-in. Not a, sorry it had to be this way. It was like I had already been erased. Around noon, something inside me shifted. I can't explain it clearly, but it felt like a thin layer of numbness forming around my heart. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just clarity. A kind of acceptance, but not the defeated kind I'd felt before. This was something else. Like I had finally reached the point where a person stops trying to swim back to people who keep pushing them under. I sat on the couch quietly, letting the realization settle in. If they don't want me there, then I don't have to want them either. And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe it. I let myself stop caring about fitting into their perfect image. The hours passed strangely slowly. I cooked a small meal, cleaned my living room, played soft music, lit a candle, and tried to reclaim my day. I told myself, you're allowed to exist peacefully, even if they don't want you. And slowly, I began to feel a kind of lightness returning. A quiet freedom. Until my phone pinged, and I froze. A message from my cousin, simply saying, "Are you watching the live stream?" Live stream. My heart thumped, but before I could type a response, another message came in from Claire. "Dad is asking for you. Please pick up if he calls." That made no sense. He didn't want me there. Why would he ask for me now? But before I could process it, my phone began vibrating non-stop, call after call after call. So fast the screen didn't have time to dim. I stared at it, confused, the numbness beginning to crack. Something was wrong. Something big. And as the calls kept coming, I knew this wasn't about guilt or sympathy. This was panic. And I had no idea yet that this was only the beginning. That the perfect event they excluded me from had gone horribly, publicly wrong. That my family, my entire family, was falling apart live in front of hundreds of people. And for reasons I couldn't understand yet, I was suddenly the person they needed. The person they were desperate to reach. The person they had rejected just days before. I didn't pick up. Not yet. I just stared at the screen, watching my dad's name flash again and again, each call stacking on top of the last, as if the universe was finally flipping a switch I didn't even know existed. And by the time the calls hit 72, I realized my invisibility had just become the one thing they couldn't ignore. I didn't answer a single call. Not from Dad. Not from Claire or my brother, Eric. I didn't even glance at the texts anymore. I had crossed a line I never thought I would. I was no longer the default problem solver. The default peacekeeper. The default invisible daughter who always made everyone else's life easier. I was finally stepping back, and it felt like standing on a cliff edge, both terrifying and liberating at the same time. By late afternoon, the chaos had begun to reach me through other channels. Neighbors I barely knew were sending messages, some almost gleeful, others bewildered, asking if I was okay. The family house on Elmwood Drive, the one everyone in the neighborhood knew as the Johnsons' estate, was apparently in complete disorder. The power had gone out hours ago because Dad had ignored the electric bill, assuming I would take care of it again like I always did. The internet was down, the freezer had defrosted, and according to a panicked neighbor, Mom had been running from room to room screaming for someone to fix this disaster. I sat on my apartment balcony, cold mug of coffee in hand, watching the sun dip below the skyline, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel a quiet satisfaction. Not the kind of satisfaction that came from revenge or malice. No, this was something purer. A feeling of justice. Balance. A realization that for decades I had carried my family's chaos in my own hands, silently, patiently, and without recognition. And now, for the first time, I was free. Free from the expectations, the demands, the endless emotional labor that had been laid on me without a single thank you, or even acknowledgement. I knew they were panicking, though. I could feel it, even from miles away. Dad had probably realized that without me stepping in, there was no one else to navigate their bills, their appliances, their deadlines. Mom, who always tried to maintain this veneer of calm, was likely spiraling into guilt and anxiety. Claire and Eric, who had always relied on me to smooth over family tensions and prevent open conflict, were probably shouting at each other, blaming one another for things they didn't even understand. And yet, despite all this, I didn't move. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't text. I just waited. By evening, the first text from Mom came through. "Rose, please. We need you. We've tried, but nothing works. The power is out, the fridge is defrosting, and the tax bill is overdue. Can you come?" I read it twice. The pleading tone, the desperation. It was the same voice that had once soothed me when I was hurt, when I had cried alone in my room. But now it had a new weight. The weight of accountability they had never shown me. I could feel the shift even in this text. She wasn't commanding, she wasn't demanding. She was begging. And yet, even with that vulnerability, I didn't respond. I wasn't their caretaker anymore. I wasn't going to be. Claire called next. "Rose, it's serious. We can't." I ignored it. Eric texted, "Rose, Dad said if you don't answer, he'll come to your apartment. Please, just help." That one made me pause, just slightly. He was frantic, sure, but also desperate. I could almost hear his voice cracking in the text. And then I remembered every time they had needed me in the past and only valued me for what I could do, not for who I was. Every insult, every exclusion, every birthday ignored, every Thanksgiving avoided. All the moments I had been told I was too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. All the years I had silently fixed problems, mediated fights, covered mistakes, and sacrificed sleep. I let out a long breath and returned to the balcony. The city lights were flickering as dusk fell. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Calm. True, unshakable calm. The panic at Elmwood Drive was theirs, not mine. Their problems had finally become just that. Their problems. And the realization was intoxicating. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was liberated. That night, I made myself dinner, poured a glass of wine, and opened a journal I hadn't touched in years. I began writing, not about their chaos, not about the bills or the defrosting freezer, but about me. About boundaries I would finally enforce. About the things I wanted in my life that didn't involve cleaning up after others. About the dreams I had sidelined, the relationships I had ignored, the career moves I had put off because family first had always been the unspoken rule. I wrote pages and pages, letting everything spill out. Anger, relief, hope, fear. For the first time, the story at the center of my life wasn't about them. It was about me. By the next morning, the calls had become almost comical in their desperation. 72 missed calls, 50 texts, 15 voicemails. The first voicemail was Dad, loud, almost shouting. "Rose, pick up. This isn't a game. The power is out. The fridge. The turkey. Everything." Pick up the phone. I pressed delete. Then Mom, Rose, I know we were wrong. I know we ignored you, excluded you, treated you unfairly, but we need your help. Please, we can't do this without you. I listened, then deleted it. My thumb hovered over the phone as the device buzzed relentlessly, but I didn't move. I wasn't going to. Hours later, a neighbor came by my apartment to check on me. I hadn't answered their messages, either. They were polite, almost hesitant, asking if I was okay after all the chaos. I told them I was fine. Perfectly fine. And I truly was. Because I had finally made a choice. I had finally chosen myself. Meanwhile, Elmwood Drive was in full-blown chaos. According to my neighbor, Dad had finally collapsed onto the couch mid-afternoon, defeated and pale. Mom was running around trying to salvage frozen vegetables and roast chickens that were melting into a puddle. Claire and Eric were arguing about who was supposed to call the utility company first. The landscaper had been called to check the frozen sprinklers, and somehow, the neighbor's teenage daughter had been drafted to attempt to reset the Wi-Fi. It was like a scene from a sitcom if you ignored the sheer panic in everyone's eyes. And none of it was my problem. By evening, the texts became more emotional. Rose, please, we're begging. We'll do anything. Just come. We need you. Can you just help us for a few hours? I ignored them all. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood a truth I had always suspected. Their fear wasn't about the frozen fridge or the blackout or the tax payment. Their fear was about losing control over me. Losing the person who had always, silently, absorbed their mistakes and their chaos. That realization settled into my bones like a warm, satisfying weight. I wasn't needed because I was exceptional or kind or indispensable. I was needed because they had trained themselves to rely on me, to assume I would always show up, silently and without question, to pick up the pieces. And now, for the first time, I wasn't going to. Late that night, I sat on my balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. The hum of traffic and distant sirens felt like music, background noise to a life I was finally living on my own terms. I thought about their voices yelling in the house, blaming each other, panicking over bills, power outages, and spoiled food. For decades, that had been my life too. The constant stress, the endless repair work, the emotional labor. And now, for once, it wasn't. I sipped my wine slowly and smiled faintly. Not out of revenge. Not out of malice. But because I understood something profound. By refusing to step in, I had returned their chaos to its rightful owners. They could handle it, or fail. But it was theirs, not mine. And for the first time in decades, I didn't care what happened. By the next morning, I had made a plan. Not a plan to rescue them. Not a plan to repair the house, the bills, or the Thanksgiving dinner. A plan for me. Boundaries. Goals. Things I wanted that didn't involve their drama or their demands. I filled page after page with ideas. Art exhibitions I wanted to attend, trips I wanted to take, courses I wanted to enroll in. Life, finally, for me. And yet, despite the relief, there was a small, sharp awareness. They would call again. They would text again. And when they did, they would realize that this time, I wasn't coming. That I had stepped away completely. That I wasn't a crutch anymore. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel anxious. I felt free. And that freedom was intoxicating. It was almost noon when I finally looked at my phone again. 102 missed calls. 68 texts. 23 voicemails. The sheer volume would have been overwhelming at any other time, but I stared at it with calm amusement. It wasn't cruelty, not exactly. It was justice, or balance, or maybe just the consequence of a lifetime of ignoring me. And that realization, more than anything, made me feel powerful. Not in a controlling, vindictive way. Just alive. The phone buzzed again. A message from Mom. Rose, please, we're begging. The tax office is threatening a lien. The neighbors are upset. The house is a mess. We need you. I read it once. I read it twice. And then, I laughed softly. Not a bitter laugh. Not a mean one. A quiet, ironic laugh that came from the core of someone who had spent decades being used and finally refused. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I poured another cup of coffee, opened my journal, and began planning my weekend getaway. Not to escape them. Not to run from responsibility. But to finally live a life that wasn't dictated by their needs or their chaos. For the first time, the story was mine to write, and it felt incredible. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The weekend arrived, and I left the city without a backward glance. My small rented car hugged the curves of the highway as I drove toward the mountains, the skyline shrinking behind me, replaced by rolling hills, evergreens, and a sky so vast it made the city feel like a distant dream. I didn't bring work, didn't bring a single obligation, didn't even bring the faintest sense of guilt. I packed a few clothes, my journal, and a camera. For the first time in decades, I was doing something entirely for myself. The drive alone was meditative. I let the music play, the windows down, the wind whipping against my cheeks. Each mile I put between myself and Elmwood Drive was a mile of freedom, of liberation, of self-reclamation. My phone was off most of the way. When I finally glanced at it, there were dozens more missed calls, texts, and voicemails, all stacking like a mountain of their panic. I didn't answer. I didn't even scroll through them. They were loud, frantic, chaotic, but their chaos was theirs, not mine. I checked into a small bed and breakfast perched on a cliffside, the kind of place that overlooked a valley of trees and a river glinting in the afternoon sun. The owners were kind, welcoming, unassuming. They didn't know my family, didn't know my history, didn't care. And that was perfect. I unpacked slowly, savoring the quiet, the silence. I drank a cup of tea on the balcony and just breathed. There were no cries for help, no urgent problems to solve, no heated arguments. Just the wind through the pines and the sun setting over a horizon that had nothing to do with Elmwood Drive. I didn't ignore the feelings that bubbled up, though. They were there, guilt, a tiny edge of worry, and that lingering hard-to-shake habit of responsibility. But each time I felt it, I reminded myself, this isn't mine. Not anymore. For decades, I had carried the weight of a family that never thanked me. For decades, I had prioritized their comfort, their stability, their image over my own. Not anymore. Not now. The first morning in the mountains, I woke early. The sunlight spilled into the cabin like gold, and I sat on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the mist rise from the valley. I opened my journal again, planning my days. Hiking trails, photography walks, small cafes in nearby towns. I felt a strange, intoxicating sensation, possibility, choice, autonomy. My life, for once, wasn't dictated by crises I didn't create. It belonged to me. And yet, even as I embraced this freedom, I couldn't completely ignore the thought of Elmwood Drive. What were they doing now? Did Dad finally figure out the electricity? Did Mom collapse into tears again? Were Claire and Eric panicking over a grocery list they hadn't managed to update? I imagined them screaming at one another, running around the house, trying to fix things that were unraveling because they had assumed I would always be there. And I smiled faintly. Not cruelly. Just knowingly. For decades, they had treated me as invisible, as a tool, as someone who would silently pick up the pieces. And now they couldn't. And for the first time that feeling, power, was mine. By midday, I received the first text that was even remotely rational. Mom, Rose, I know you're upset. I know we've been unfair. Can we talk? I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Could we talk? After decades of exclusion, silence, and being taken for granted, did they even understand what that meant? Or were they hoping that my fix-everything reflex would kick in if they just said the right words? I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my camera and headed to a trail I had found earlier. The hike was strenuous but exhilarating. With each step, the anxiety I had carried for years seemed to fall away like old leaves. My lungs filled with crisp mountain air, my legs burned pleasantly, and for the first time in decades, I moved without obligation, without expectation, without guilt. I stopped halfway up to photograph the river slicing through the valley below, the sun catching the water just right, the reflection dancing like liquid gold. I captured the moment, but I also felt it, the rare sensation of being fully present, fully alive, fully unclaimed by others' needs. That evening, I returned to the cabin and made a small dinner for myself. No rushing, no multitasking, no checking phones every 5 seconds. I ate slowly, savoring each bite. The peace was intoxicating. I thought about the family's chaos, about Elmwood Drive, and I realized something profound. Their fear, their panic, their endless need for me. It wasn't love. It wasn't care. It was expectation, entitlement. They had spent decades relying on me because it was convenient, because it solved their problems. And now, when the convenience was gone, they were lost. I let that thought settle with a quiet smile. Not triumphantly, just truthfully. The next morning, I woke early again. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue. I decided to explore the nearby town, a place with brick streets, small cafes, antique shops, and people who didn't know me and didn't care. I wandered, taking photos, sipping cappuccinos, talking to shopkeepers about their crafts and their lives. No one expected anything of me. No one demanded my attention or my labor. I laughed softly when I realized how long it had been since I had felt this unpressured, unburdened. How long since I had done anything solely for myself. By mid-afternoon, a familiar buzz began in the background. My phone. I hadn't turned it on until now. 1, 2, 3, then 10 messages. The majority were from Mom. Pleading. Apologizing. Begging. Rose, please. I know we were wrong. We can't fix this. Come back. I scrolled through, read a few. Then deleted them. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel resentment. I felt clarity. For decades, I had allowed their chaos to define my life. Now, it didn't. Then came a voicemail from Dad. Rose, I know you're mad. I know we've been idiots. But we really need you. Please. Call me. I deleted it without listening. And again, I didn't feel cruelty. Just separation. Distance. The realization that my life, my energy, my time, were mine alone. Later that evening, I settled back on the porch, journal open, tea steaming beside me. I wrote pages of plans, dreams, boundaries. I wrote about vacations I wanted to take, classes I wanted to enroll in, friends I wanted to reconnect with, hobbies I had shelved for decades. I wrote about a life free from constant crisis management, free from the assumption that my existence was a resource to be tapped at will. I wrote, and I felt alive. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I acknowledged the truth. They would try again. They would escalate. They would call, text, beg, plead, perhaps even show up at my apartment. They had done it before. But now, something had shifted. The pattern was broken. The cycle was broken. I wasn't going to fix it anymore. And that was a terrifying, liberating, exhilarating truth all at once. By the third day of my getaway, I felt a rhythm settle in. I hiked in the morning, explored the town in the afternoon, wrote in the evenings. And slowly, the noise of Elmwood Drive, both literal and emotional, began to fade. I no longer imagined the shouting, the chaos, the frantic attempts to fix problems they had ignored until the last moment. I only imagined myself, free and unclaimed. And in that imagining, I found peace. One evening, a postcard arrived at the cabin. Simple, unassuming, handwritten. "We're sorry. We can't fix this without you. Please come back. Love, Mom." I held it in my hand, studying the familiar handwriting, the pleading tone. I smiled softly, then placed it face down on the counter. For the first time, I realized something important. Their apology, their fear, their need, none of it had the power to dictate my actions anymore. They could apologize 1,000 times, plead 1,000 times, and I would remain unchanged. I had reclaimed myself. The next morning, I woke early again, dressed warmly, and walked to the cliff's edge to watch the sunrise. The valley stretched below me, gold and pink hues spilling across the hills. I breathed deeply, savoring the air, the silence, the peace. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Their chaos wasn't my problem. Their fear, their panic, their frantic need for control. It was theirs, not mine. And I could step back, finally, completely, and let it all unfold without me. By the time I returned to the cabin, I was smiling faintly. My phone buzzed incessantly in my bag, ignored. I didn't even glance at it. I sipped my tea, wrote in my journal, and simply existed. The world outside my bubble could burn, freeze, panic, implode. I would remain untouched. I was untethered, unclaimed, free. And it was glorious. That night, as I sat on the porch under a sky full of stars, I realized something profound. Their fear wasn't about the bills, or the turkey, or the defrosted freezer. Their fear was about me. Losing me. Losing the person who had always silently carried their chaos. And for the first time, that fear existed without consequence for me. I wasn't going to step in. I wasn't going to bail them out. I wasn't going to sacrifice my peace to fix their mistakes. I had tried for decades, and it had never been enough. Now, it was time for me. And as the stars glittered above the valley, I whispered to myself, softly, almost reverently, "This is freedom. This is justice. This is mine." The fourth morning in the mountains, I woke to the soft patter of rain against the cabin window. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and wet earth, and I felt a serenity I hadn't known in decades. My phone remained silent, tucked away in my bag, buzzing occasionally with the faint insistence of Elmwood Drive. I didn't check it. I had learned my lesson. The world could demand, plead, or panic, but my peace was not negotiable. I brewed coffee, wrapped myself in a thick sweater, and stepped out onto the balcony. The valley lay shrouded in mist, silver and blue, ethereal. It was quiet. No arguments. No crises. No urgent calls for help. Just me, the rain, and the view stretching endlessly. I took a deep breath and felt my chest expand. For once, I didn't feel the weight of the family I had been tethered to for so long. I felt light. Free. Untouched by the chaos I had carried for years. After a slow breakfast, I decided to explore a nearby trail. It was rugged, wild, and perfect. The path wound through towering evergreens and over rocky ridges. The mist made the world mysterious, each step a discovery. I paused often, taking photos, savoring the sensation of moving through a world that didn't demand anything from me. My phone remained off in my bag. For the first time, I didn't even think about who might be calling or texting. I only existed for myself. By mid-afternoon, I returned to the cabin and finally turned on my phone, not to answer anyone, but to see the scale of the aftermath. I had expected messages, but not this many. Over 100 missed calls. Dozens of texts, each more desperate than the last. Voicemails stacked like urgent piles, each from someone different. Dad, Mom, Claire, Eric. Some apologetic, some panicked, some angry, some pleading. I scrolled through a few, just to see the words, but I didn't respond. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. Their chaos had been relentless, but now it was theirs. The power outage, the defrosted freezer, the frozen turkey, the bills, they had to manage it all without me. For decades, I had been the invisible force that held their world together. Their emergencies were my emergencies. Their mistakes became my responsibilities. But no more. That cycle had ended. I didn't need to fix it. I didn't need to absorb their panic. I didn't need to be the crutch, the invisible daughter, the unpaid caretaker. I opened my journal and began writing again. Not a list of their demands, not a plan to save them, not a record of their mistakes, but a roadmap for myself. Things I wanted to do, places I wanted to go, goals I had postponed for years. Boundaries I had never enforced. Friendships I had neglected. Hobbies I had abandoned. Dreams I had buried under decades of their expectations. And as I wrote, I realized that this was the first time I had ever truly lived for me. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the world sparkling and fresh. I made a small dinner for myself, slowly, deliberately. I lit a candle and ate alone, but not lonely. For the first time in decades, I felt fully present in my own life. My mind wandered briefly to Elmwood Drive. I imagined Dad pacing the living room, Mom wringing her hands, Claire and Eric frantic over groceries and bills. And I smiled, faintly, not out of malice, but out of recognition. They had ignored me for years, treated me as optional, taken my presence for granted. And now, for the first time, the consequences were theirs. Night fell, and I settled on the porch with my tea and journal. My phone buzzed again. Another flurry of texts and calls. I ignored them. I didn't even glance at the screen. The messages could pile up. The voicemails could accumulate. It didn't matter. Their panic, their fear, their desperate need for control. It wasn't mine to manage. I let that truth settle over me like a warm blanket. For the first time, I felt untethered, unclaimed, free. The next morning, I woke with the same calm clarity. I brewed coffee and watched the sunrise paint the valley in shades of gold and pink. I realized something profound. All those years of carrying their burdens had been a distortion of love. Love is choice, not obligation. Love is care without expectation. What I had experienced wasn't love. It was dependency, entitlement, and expectation masquerading as family bonds. And for decades, I had been trapped in it. But now I wasn't. I was free. By mid-morning, I packed a small bag for a day trip to the town nearby. I wanted to explore, take photos, interact with the world on my own terms. I wandered through brick streets, visited antique shops, stopped at cafes. People were kind, strangers were patient, no one demanded anything from me. I felt light, alive, present. My heart, so long burdened, felt unshackled. And as I walked, I realized something even more profound. I didn't need their recognition, their thanks, their apologies. I didn't need validation from the family that had spent decades treating me as invisible. I only needed to recognize my own worth, and that recognition was enough. Back at the cabin, I opened my journal again. I wrote pages and pages about my boundaries, my goals, my desires. I wrote about the life I wanted, unencumbered by the demands of others. I wrote about dreams that had been buried under years of expectation and responsibility. And as I wrote, I felt a quiet joy settle over me, a joy I hadn't known existed. I realized that my life, my energy, my presence, belonged to me and no one else. For the first time, I truly understood what freedom meant. Late that afternoon, I finally checked one message, a short, trembling text from Mom. "Rose, please. We're sorry. Please help. We can't do this without you." I stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering over the reply button. 4 decades of reflex had wanted me to respond, to jump in, to fix everything. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled softly and deleted it. Their need, their panic, their fear, it didn't control me anymore. I was free to live my life, make my choices, and prioritize myself without guilt or apology. Evening fell, and the valley glowed under the light of the moon. I sat on the porch, sipping tea, listening to the soft sounds of the forest. I imagined Elmwood Drive in chaos, imagining them scrambling, shouting, panicking, trying to fix problems they had ignored for too long. And I felt nothing but peace. Not joy in their misfortune. Not cruelty. Just clarity. I had finally stepped back, finally refused to carry burdens that weren't mine. And in that refusal, I had found my strength, my power, my liberation. The days passed in a rhythm I had never known. Mornings hiking, afternoons exploring the town, evenings journaling and reflecting. I didn't answer the calls, texts, or voicemails from Elmwood Drive. I didn't need to. Their chaos was theirs to manage. I had discovered a truth that had eluded me for decades. Presence is a choice. Effort is a gift. Boundaries are sacred. And when someone refuses to respect them, walking away is not abandonment, it is self-preservation. By the end of the week, I had mapped out a life that was mine alone. A life of autonomy, joy, and presence. I had discovered hobbies I had long ignored, passions I had abandoned, and desires I had hidden under decades of family expectation. I was free to pursue them, unburdened by guilt or obligation. And in that freedom, I found a joy so profound, so intense, it was almost overwhelming. Finally, the last morning in the mountains, I packed my bags for the return to the city. But I returned changed. I didn't carry their chaos with me. I didn't carry guilt or obligation. I carried only myself, whole, free, and untethered. The drive back was quiet, contemplative. The skyline of the city rose slowly in the distance, but I no longer felt the weight of Elmwood Drive looming over me. I was separate, distinct, and unclaimed. When I arrived at my apartment, I set my bags down and sat on the couch, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed incessantly, texts, calls, voicemails, but I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I had learned the most important lesson of my life. My presence was not a requirement. My energy was not their property. My life was mine alone, and I could step back without guilt, without fear, and without apology. That night, I made a simple dinner for myself and curled up with a blanket and a book. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious. Elmwood Drive could scream, panic, collapse. It didn't matter. I was free. I was whole. I was present in my own life. And in that presence, I finally understood the true meaning of liberation. Over the next days, the calls and messages continued, but they no longer held power over me. I ignored them. I deleted them. I didn't engage. And with each passing day, I felt lighter, stronger, more alive. My family's chaos was theirs, and my peace was mine. For decades, I had been invisible, taken for granted, expected to carry the burdens of a family that never thanked me. And now, for the first time, I was seen, by myself. For the first time, I realized that my worth wasn't determined by their demands or their gratitude. It was determined by my choices, my boundaries, and my ability to reclaim my life. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need to fix their mistakes. I only needed to recognize my own value, and I had. And in that recognition, I found the ultimate freedom. The ultimate justice. Not revenge. Not cruelty, but balance. Autonomy. Liberation. For the first time in decades, I felt truly alive. I felt strong. I felt whole. As I watched the city lights flicker outside my window, I whispered to myself, softly, almost reverently, "This is mine. My life. My peace. My choice." And I knew finally that nothing, not their chaos, their panic, their desperate pleas, could take that away from me. Not now. Not ever.